Dodge Power Wagon. Quite likely still the greatest off-road tool ever invented by man. Even after 75 years of development, no one's come up with anything better for going to remote areas that you probably shouldn't even be going. It's not a military vehicle, although it was an offshoot of military vehicles developed during World War II. And apparently the guys came home and remembered driving some of these incredible machines while they were in the service and demanded a civilian version. This particular truck, of course, is not even remotely stock. This is a quad cab Gen 4 built by Precision Power Wagons out of Girard, Pennsylvania. Owner Dan Mininger and his crew build what are, in my opinion, the greatest power wagon resto-mods on the market. They churn out 2 or 3 a year. This particular truck is a recent build with 620 miles on it, every trick they can throw at it, and a price tag to build it of about $320,000. So if you want one like it, you can call Dan. He'll tell you, come back in 3 years with a big pile of cash, or you can have this one right now, no waiting, ready to go. It's loaded with just about every option, including the quad cab. And if you ask the guys who build them, they'll say that there are probably between 11 and 15 in existence. It takes 2 cabs and 6 doors to create it. The frame is lengthened by about 15 inches, and there's a custom bed on the back to give it just the right proportions. If you didn't know better, you'd almost think that this is how the factory did it. Of course, powered by a Cummins turbo diesel, and it's all state-of-the-art modern hardware underneath. Let's take a ride. Inside, the Power Wagon is still fairly vintage. Big flat metal dashboard, but as you can see, everything is state-of-the-art and brand new. Modern gauges, climate control, killer AM FM CD DVD stereo with a touchscreen, power windows, these gorgeous leather Recaro seats, and this particular one is equipped with an Allison automatic transmission, so it's extremely easy to use. I mean, this one is no more difficult to drive than my Suburban. So despite the ancient look, everything inside is modern, and it drives no more difficult than a modern vehicle. Turn the key, let the fuel pump run for a few seconds. It is definitely a diesel. It is the IST 170 Cummins, which is an offshoot of the 4BT. It's an electronically controlled version of the 4BT, which is arguably the most reliable machine ever conceived by man. If you have fuel and you can make it spin, it will run. The 170 in the nomenclature refers to horsepower, and the 170 horsepower doesn't seem like a lot, but the 440 pound-feet of torque make this truck extremely user-friendly on the road. Drop it into gear, power steering, it's just that easy. Harwood Motors has sold about, I don't know, 30 or 35 Power Wagons over the years, including quite a few from Precision. And each time they're a little bit better. Dan tells me that each time they finish one, they learn something new. So this truck is an accumulation of probably 15 years of his knowledge. It is noticeably smoother and more polished than most of them that we've had. And as I said, it goes down the road just like a modern vehicle. Although what I do like about the Precision Power Wagons is that they don't erase the truck's soul. It doesn't feel like a new truck. It still feels like an old truck. It still feels like a Power Wagon, but it's incredibly capable. Acceleration is effortless, and that's one of my favorite things, is when you pull out on the road, you can almost see the people behind you go, oh no, I'm stuck behind that old truck. And then it just accelerates away from them just effortlessly. That 440 pounds of torque from the Cummins turbo diesel. Just rolls it out of everybody's way without any difficulty at all. The Allison 4-speed automatic transmission is really a nice complement to the diesel motor. It's got well-chosen ratios, and with an overdrive on top, it cruises easily at 70 or 75 miles an hour. I don't know if the mic is picking it up, but it makes awesome turbo sounds, like a big rig. I mean, the only thing you're looking eye to eye with are the guys driving semi-trucks. Anybody else in a standard Dodge Ram, they look like they're driving their mom's truck. This is probably the manliest thing on 4 wheels. We're humming along here at about 60 miles an hour, about 1,600 RPM. Just so easy. It's comfortable, it's smooth, it's quiet. I've got the heater on, so it's staying nice and comfortable in here even though it's about 30 degrees outside. Really a no compromises old truck. I love the sound of that turbo coming online when you squeeze the throttle a little bit. And even in overdrive, there's plenty of punch. The rest of the powertrain that Dan chose, it's got a Dana 60 front axle and a General Motors 14 bolt in back from a 1-ton. There's a gigantic disc brake at all 4 corners. There's power steering up front. Coil springs in the back, which take the place of the original leaf springs. A drastic improvement in ride quality. Front springs are still leafs, but they're considerably softer than the original spring packs, which were 11 leafs, and I think 13 was optional, so you can imagine the originals rode like bricks. This one is very civilized, relatively speaking. Boy, when it drops into 4th gear, this sucker just goes. It's kind of a strange feeling with all that torque. Usually when a transmission shifts, the engine slows down. In this, the engine doesn't slow down, the truck speeds up. It's just yanking it up to speed. Those giant tires mean it's a little bit jiggly. As I said, nothing like an original Power Wagon, which, to be honest, is more tractor than truck. The originals are capable, but as you can see on the glove box there, maximum speed in an original truck was 52 miles an hour. I'm going 52 right now without any effort at all. The #1 client for the Power Wagons was the Department of the Interior, the Parks Department. Of the 96,000 or so Power Wagons that were built during its 20-something year run, about 40% of them went to the Parks Department, and they used them for all kinds of things. I've seen them with water pumps on them, and sawmills, and oil derricks, and carrying enormous water tanks. If you need to go somewhere where there are no roads, nothing could do it better than a Power Wagon. Got plenty of oil pressure here. It's about 40 psi at idle. Plenty of electricity. Dan was thoughtful enough to include exhaust gas temperature gauge, and you can watch that move around in time with turbo boost. There is a turbo boost gauge. This 456 gears make it really feel punchy. So don't let the horsepower numbers fool you. This is a very usable and extremely contemporary truck that doesn't mind dicing with modern traffic a little bit. It does include a complete four-wheel drive system with the usual two-wheel drive high, four-wheel drive high, four-wheel drive low through a traditional center transfer case and front locking hubs. So it's still ready to go off into the messy mud, any remote place you've got. Dan and the guys have used the original Ramsey 10-ton winch up front, and they've maintained the engine-driven performance. It's not an electric winch like a lot of the other conversion companies use, which strikes me as kind of a cop-out, but it's hydraulically actuated and powered by the engine. So if you do serious off-roading, having that winch is going to be an incredibly useful tool. I have to admit, I love the view out over the hood. That little stubby hood with the radiator cap out front there. The split windshield. There's a lot of headroom in here. And with the quad cab, there is a reasonable back seat if you've got kids, making this a much more comfortable truck than the standard cab versions, which are a little claustrophobic. It's another reason why the 4BT is a great choice. You don't have to move the firewall. It slots right in there just like the original 6-cylinder engine did. So it leaves all of the space you need for climate control, air conditioning ducts, a nice stereo. All of that is in place. Even the pedal arrangement, which looks kind of strange at a glance, feels natural after about 5 minutes of use. There's nothing you need to get used to on the truck. There's no compromises you need to make to enjoy it. And Dan tells me stories of multiple customers who have purchased trucks from him and then drive them across the country. And that would certainly be no problem for this vehicle here. Gas mileage is probably somewhere between mediocre and acceptable. The diesels do pretty well, but I think if you're buying this truck, gas mileage isn't your first thought. It's also worth pointing out that there's a Class 4 hitch out back, so this truck will pull a trailer without any trouble. And with all that torque on tap, it doesn't struggle. And just between you and me, there are plenty of modifications to the 4BT to eke out even more power, but I honestly don't think the truck needs it. And I'm squeezing it about half throttle, and we've just scooted up to 60 miles an hour in about 8 seconds. And I bet this truck will cruise all day at 75 without any troubles at all. There's surprisingly little wind noise. It seals up nicely. And even with those big mirrors out there, it's not whistling or making a lot of wind noise as we go down the road here at speed. God, I love the sound of that turbo. Quite likely the fastest Power Wagon we've had, except perhaps maybe the one we had with a 6BT in it, although that one was fairly claustrophobic because they did have to move the firewall and it was a regular cab. But as soon as this one drops into fourth gear, it really takes off. And there's another gear beyond that for highway cruising. The 4BT is a little bit crude, I'll give you that. At idle there are some vibrations and you can feel it in the seat of your pants. But at anything above about 1500 RPM it smooths out. And again, that seems in character for the Power Wagon. You don't want it to be too polished, you don't want to knock off too many of the rough edges because that's not what the Power Wagon's about. And that's what I was kind of hinting at when I said Precision Power Wagons maintain the original soul of the Power Wagon. Capable, beautifully built, extremely well finished, but not so perfect that it doesn't feel like a 75-year-old truck anymore. Full out, I think this engine makes about 20 pounds of boost. Although you'll rarely dip into it, it's got fairly vast reserves of torque. Just about any speed. Transmission is usually hesitant to downshift, and I found that you don't really need the downshift. That deep well of torque just pulls the truck along without much work at all. Diesels tend to run fairly cool. As I mentioned, it's about 30 degrees today. I'm seeing about 190 on the gauge, and the heater's putting out decent heat, so it's comfortable. But in the hot weather, I don't think you have to worry much about this one getting hot under the collar. Dan installs a gigantic aluminum radiator up front, and it does have a engine-driven fan that is thermostatically controlled. So it's always at about the right temperature. Custom-built four-door cab, which, as I mentioned, is two cabs stitched together and 6 doors welded into 4 to give it an appropriate shape. And there's a remarkable lack of squeak and rattles inside. It's very tight feeling. Part of that's due to the enormous Power Wagon frame, and this is still sitting on an original frame. It is not a late model frame or a custom fabrication. It has been lengthened with about 15 inches added just behind the bed, or just behind the cab, underneath the bed. But it's as sturdy as a railroad bridge. Now that we've had about 30 or 35 of these, I can confidently say this is probably the best one yet. I hope you enjoyed the ride. We'll see you next time.